Dissecting the debates, Republican candidates weigh in on God, religious freedom, and life issues. Key Democrats bolt. The president facing opposition to the Iranian nuclear deal from within his own party. Preparing for lives of service. Young people focused on Eucharistic spirituality visit with Pope Francis. And grazing goats. Who needs mowers when hungry goats are willing to clean up the congressional cemetery? Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, August 7th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. 24 million people watched Republican presidential candidates debate in Cleveland last night, that according to Nielsen ratings. That makes it the highest-rated primary debate in television history. There were a few on-stage spats, but the top 10 candidates still managed to take swings at Democrat Hillary Clinton.
We expect them to be
Donald Trump is again unapologetically being Donald Trump.
I've been challenged by so many people, and I don't frankly have time for total political correctness.
During Fox News' primetime debate, Jeb Bush won some cheers on education.
If we are going to compete in this world we're in today, there's no possible way we can do it with lowering expectations and dumbing down everything. Children are going to suffer and families' hearts are going to be broken that their kids won't be able to get a job in the 21st century.
But Trump held much of the attention at center stage, defending past contributions to Democratic candidates and calling the relationship between money and politics a broken system.
So what'd you get from Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi?
Well, I'll tell you what, with Hillary Clinton, I said, be at my wedding, and she came to my wedding. You know why? She had no choice because I gave. I didn't know her money would be used on private jets going all over the world.
The Democratic frontrunner wasn't in the room, but she was clearly a topic of conversation.
We spend a lot of time talking about Hillary Clinton and pitting us back and forth. Let's be clear, we should be talking about Hillary Clinton on that last subject, because everywhere in the world that Hillary Clinton touched is more messed up today than before she and the
We have many questions to come. Many questions to come.
And he wasn't the only one taking shots at Clinton.
Hillary is the candidate, which I doubt that would be a dream come true.
All of the candidates, except Donald Trump, voiced support for whoever gets the party's nomination. And overall opinions from pundits and polls vary. But how do the candidates score on Catholic social issues? Catherine Szeltner is here to take a look tonight. Catherine?
Brian, in the Fox News debate, the three moderators didn't hold back. They asked tough questions, hitting on some key Catholic issues: abortion, immigration. They even asked about God.
Hey, look, he's already hedging his bet on the Clintons, okay?
In between debate jabs and one-liners, one political theology professor says
the real star of the show was Marco Rubio, saying that there's a constitutional right to life.
Catholic Senator Marco Rubio wasn't the only one to address abortion. Governor Mike Huckabee took aim at Planned Parenthood, saying it's time we protect children instead of rip up their body parts and sell them like they're parts to a Buick. Senator Ted Cruz said he'd prosecute the abortion provider his first day in office. Dr. Chad Pecknold believes pro-life issues are a top priority for Catholic voters.
But if that is our first priority, then babies and marriages and families of immigrants matters a lot to us.
Catholic Governor Jeb Bush expressed compassion for immigrants last night.
I believe that the great majority of people coming here illegally have no other option. They want to provide for their family. But we need to control our border.
3 out of the 10 candidates on last night's stage say they're Catholic. So what does that mean for Catholic voters?
We can't simply run after any Catholic candidate. We have to go for the candidates who most reflect and most support the Church's teaching.
Before closing statements, the presidential hopefuls answered if they've received any word from God. Responses ranged from humble to humorous.
I think God has blessed us. He's blessed the Republican Party with some very good candidates. The Democrats can't even find one.
Dr. Pecknold says Catholics should keep 3 topics in mind when watching debates: life, the family, and religious liberty. The first Democratic debate is set for October 13th. Brian?
Thank you, Catherine. We'll have more on the GOP debate reaction and analysis in just a few minutes. But First, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer says that he will vote against President Obama's nuclear deal with Iran. Schumer says he doesn't trust Iran to keep its end of the deal reached with 6 Western nations. The agreement seeking to curb Iran's ability to acquire a nuclear weapon is in the midst of a congressional review. Another Democrat, Eliot Engel, the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is also rejecting the plan. Now, the president stands by his controversial comparison between Iranian hardliners and congressional Republicans. He says they are both determined on derailing a nuclear deal between Iran and the West. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell promises the Senate will debate the Iran deal next month. Obama says McConnell and the rest of his caucus opposed the deal before they ever even read it. Islamic State terrorists abduct dozens of Christians after capturing a town in Syria. Activists say ISIS has abducted 230 people, many of them Christians, from a central Syrian town captured earlier this week. The terrorists have seized heavy artillery from Syria's defeated army. Now, the Catholic Herald reports that town is home to a monastery where Father Jacques Mourad was kidnapped in May. He had taken in dozens of families and 100 children seeking refuge from the fighting. Their fate is unknown tonight. Pope Francis meets with young people from dozens of countries. They're in Rome celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Eucharistic Youth Movement. Now, that movement focuses on Christian formation of young people, ages 5 to 25, based on a Eucharistic spirituality. It prepares youth for a life of Christian service in our flawed and secularized world. Francis talked with the young people about the roots of Christian persecution in the Middle East.
Medio Oriente anche stiamo vedendo che tanta gente.
The Pope saying in the Middle East, not only are the religious and Christians not respected, but so often they are killed and persecuted. Alan Holdren joining us from Rome tonight. Alan, in referring to persecution of Christians in the Middle East, the Pope talked about lack of respect for their identity. What more did he say about that?
Well, the Pope said that throughout history, conflict has come from a lack of respect for others. He said that when others aren't like you, not to shun them, not to start a conflict, but to look for the good in them, to look for their values, and to concentrate on that. But he said respect above all and dialogue to resolve conflict.
He also talked about tension and conflict in families. What did he say?
That's right. He said that every single family, every individual, every group in society, everyone has conflict and is in tension. He said this is a fact of life. He said not to be afraid of it, but not to seek it out. People who seek it out, he said, are sick. He said that living a life without tension is impossible, and that the only possibility to be without tension is being with Christ in heaven.
And these young people he met with focus on Eucharistic spirituality. What did he say about that?
He told them to always remember the words of Jesus at the Last Supper, do this in memory of me. He said that in the presence of the Eucharist, when they receive the Eucharist at Mass, to always remember that that's Christ present, and that when they receive him, they're present there with him as well. He said that in doing so, they also remember the words of Christ there at the Last Supper and deepen the mystery of the Eucharist.
All right, thank you for sharing that moment with us. Alan Holdren in Rome. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Brian.
Contraception Conundrum. That's a unique title for a conference this weekend at Georgetown University. Researchers from Northwestern, Rutgers, and other universities gathered to discuss birth control health risks. Tonight, Jason Calvi talks with a conference speaker, pharmacist Dr. Ross Pelton, the author of The Pill Problem.
Ross, is the pill safe?
Some women take it safely over time, but a lot of women develop side effects. It depends on the woman.
You mentioned that the pill leads to nutrient depletions. Can you mention some of those, and what are the consequences of those depletions?
Oral contraceptives deplete all the B vitamins, B1, B2, B3, B6, B12, folic acid. They deplete magnesium and selenium and tyrosine, the amino acid tyrosine, and coenzyme Q10. These different nutrient depletions cause different types of health problems. And even in the same person, the nutrient depletion can cause different health problems. But one of the ones I'm most concerned about is vitamin B6 is required to produce serotonin. And if you have low serotonin levels, you're much more likely to become depressed. And Oral contraceptives also deplete the amino acid tyrosine, and tyrosine is required to produce dopamine and norepinephrine, which are two other neurotransmitters that regulate moods and emotions.
But however, you know, the other side, if somebody was from the FDA, they would say the pill is fine to be used, it's safe, don't worry about it.
In my book, The Drug-Induced Nutrient Depletion Handbook, I've got over 500 peer-reviewed scientific references. All of the information I talk about is backed up by scientific studies.
Why isn't anybody listening to this?
The information that I researched for the Drug-Induced Nutrient Depletion Handbook, I've got hundreds and hundreds of scientific studies that appear in dozens, if not maybe even hundreds of scientific journals. Physicians don't have time to track all this information down, and negative studies like this don't get publicized. So it just kind of languishes in the medical literature and doesn't get publicized.
It's incredible. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason and Dr. Ross Pelton. So now back to the Republican debates in Cleveland last night. 7 candidates who didn't make that primetime cut shared an earlier pre-debate forum on Fox News Channel. Former Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina, the only Republican woman in the race, seemed to win over at least one rival. Former Texas Governor Rick Perry says he'd prefer Fiorina over John Kerry as the U.S. negotiator with Iran. Becket Adams, correspondent for the Washington Examiner, joins us. And Fiorina looked pretty sharp. Where do you think her campaign goes from here?
I think it actually only goes up from here. I think she did a phenomenal job. She was on point. She was clear-cut. She was well-spoken. She got almost all of her points across in a single breath. And then she continued it even after the debate when she appeared on MSNBC and discussed with Chris Matthews. He pressed her to explain what she meant and how she can get away with calling a Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton a liar. And Fiorina knocked it out of the park. She was clear. She was concise. And she actually left Chris Matthews, of all people, momentarily breathless. He couldn't think of anything to say, and he ended the interview by saying, well, now I understand why you stood out tonight. She has been doing wonderful. She's getting a lot of talk, a lot of traffic, a lot of chatter, and I think, if anything, if it continues this way, especially with polling, we'll see her on the debate stage with the big kid crowd next time.
So a couple of Catholic candidates, Santorum and Jindal, they both say that they would issue an executive order protecting religious freedom. Good idea or not so good?
Well, I'm all for protecting religious freedom, and I think that is actually the role of the government to protect those rights. However, I think there's a bigger issue that needs to be addressed. Now, they said specifically protecting the religious liberties of specific groups from, say, persecution by federal agencies. I think what would be important for, say, a commander-in-chief or would-be president is to look at what has happened to those federal agencies that has been so corrupted that they can be allowed to persecute religious groups. At the same time, I lean more towards let the states sort of deal with those protections of groups in states as opposed to making it a federal issue. When in doubt, stay away from, I would say, executive orders. It's not a bad idea, but I think it ignores a bigger problem. For instance, the sort of corruption we saw in the IRS.
Yeah. Let's move to the top 10 there, the big debate. Who came out on top of that?
Last night, I think Marco Rubio did very well spoken, very eloquent, very passionate, very polished, but not too polished. I think Walker was over polished. I think Senator Cruz needs to lose his script. He needs to come more from the heart and less from what he has memorized from.
Who bombed? Did anyone stick their foot in their mouth?
Donald Trump, I think, was a huge disappointment. Like everyone else, I think he's this sort of sideshow, but I expected him to be a little more. Not so much guns blazing, but a little more on point. He rambled, he meandered, he had no points. He has absolutely, I think just based on last night, he has no basic grasp of policy or executive ideas of how to run a state. And I think Rand Paul also whiffed a few times, especially when he went up against bulldogs being Governor Chris Christie and Donald Trump. Those two have been fighting people their entire life. That's been their goal. That's not his temperament. He's a retired doctor, and he tried to take on 2 pit bulls, and I think he whiffed on both.
Who stood out on pro-life issues?
Last night, I thought that former Governor Mike Huckabee did really well. I also thought in the happy hour debate, I was disappointed by Fox News moderators that they didn't actually bring up the Planned Parenthood scandal. In fact, it was on Rick Santorum was the person who first mentioned it, and then it was until the later debate that we finally heard people talk about it. But I think Huckabee was very eloquent, and I think Marco Rubio was great on it.
All right, we'll talk much more about it. Becket Adams with the Washington Examiner. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Coming up, Taiwan braces for a monster storm that could produce deadly landslides. And picking up the charred pieces left behind by Northern California's wildfires. Friday evening. Thank you for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. The Archdiocese of Milwaukee announces this week a $21 million settlement with several hundred victims of clergy abuse. It's one of a dozen dioceses nationwide to file for bankruptcy in the past 10 years due to abuse claim settlements. Dr. Matthew Bunson of Catholic Distance University co-authored Pope Benedict XVI and the Sexual Abuse Crisis from our Sunday Visitor. What are some of the key terms in this settlement? It's not just about money, is it?
No, quite the opposite. We're looking at the results of 4 years, basically, of negotiations that have followed the declaration of bankruptcy by the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. A lot of wrangling by the lawyers, understandably so, because of the financial situation facing the Archdiocese as a result of claims. This one basically divides up $21 million among 330 victims. But as you say, it's not just about money. The Archdiocese has set aside $500,000 in order to provide counseling, pastoral care for the victims, which is very consistent with what we see now with settlements across the United States, where great focus is placed on providing care for victims.
This has been a terrible hit for the church. Where do we stand now with this tragedy?
Yeah, any sex abuse case is one too many. The bishops are uniform in that with the zero-tolerance policy. What we've seen, though, is a real change, a complete sea change. Just in the last decade, we had hundreds of cases in the early 2000s. Last year, in 2014, we had a grand total of 6 substantiated claims of incidents by known minors. So in other words, young people who are victims of sexual abuse. We're down to 6. Now, 6 is still too many.
That's great progress.
But it is immense progress, and it's worth talking about.
So as the church continues to grapple with this, is there any way to predict what happens next?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a twofold process in the coming years. The first is kind of what we're seeing right now with the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, where these old cases are being settled, finally closing a very dark and difficult chapter for the church. But building on what we were just talking about with the number of cases that we're down to in single digits, we're going to see continued progress, I think, in the zero-tolerance policy, as well as the fact that the United States Catholic Church across the board, as well now internationally, the Church is recognized as kind of the gold standard for the protection of minors. Other institutions in the U.S. and around the world are looking to us as they craft their own policies for child protection. That's an immense achievement, but it's something else that we need to keep talking about.
As it should be.
As it should be.
Well, the author of Pope Benedict XVI and the Sexual Abuse Crisis, Dr. Matthew Bunson, thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you.
A massive storm churning in the Pacific gains strength as it closes in on the island nation of Taiwan. Super Typhoon Sudalar is expected to barrel straight across the island. Taiwan's Central Weather Bureau is issuing warnings for seafarers. Forecasts for heavy rain in the central mountains creating a high risk for deadly landslides. Hundreds were killed by landslides there in 2009. A week-long search operation on the Indian Ocean island of Reunion tries to relocate or locate debris from the doomed MH370 flight. A wing piece believed to be part of the missing jet was found there last week. Experts at a French laboratory continue examining the debris with no final conclusion yet. The Malaysian transport minister insists the partial wing flap is from the doomed flight.
I must mention that most of the investigators are convinced that it belongs to MH370, and we are all in the same direction.
Malaysia officials also say more airplane parts have washed up on Reunion Island. There's been no other confirmation of those claims from other countries involved in that search. Hundreds of people driven from their homes by California wildfires are anxious to check on their pets and their possessions. Some are still not able to get near their homes. They're stuck camping in cars and trailers, drinking from styrofoam cups, hoping their houses haven't been reduced to ashes. Some properties burned and others survived untouched near Clear Lake, north of San Francisco. Chairs, burned books, and broken dishes sit in piles of ash with burned out cars dotting the rubble. More than 43 homes have been destroyed. 13,000 people have evacuated. Up next, Pope Francis gets to the heart of true volunteerism with his August prayer intentions. And clearing Washington's congressional cemetery is a tasty feast for these goats. That setting aside our very selves, we may learn to be neighbors to those who find themselves on the margins of human life and society. the Pope's August prayer intention for evangelization. Thanks for joining us on this Friday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Julie Bodner is Volunteer Program Coordinator for Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington. So the Pope's evangelization intention matches very closely with his general intention for volunteers to give generously of themselves. How does this get to the heart of true volunteerism?
So I think the word that strikes me in that is generously, that we're called to give generously. We're not called to give out of our excess. We're called to be intentional about our time and about our talents and to give out of a spirit of love. And he also calls us to be neighbors to one another. So this is meant to be an encounter with each other and a chance to build bridges across communities.
And Pope Francis very much sets an example in this area. What do you suggest or recommend to people who are seeking to truly serve others, get out of themselves and do something for someone else?
Get involved. There's a lot of work out there that needs to be done. There's a lot of organizations that want your help. I can speak to my experience working with the Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington. We love volunteers. We have thousands of them, and they're wonderful, and they help our staff multiply the staff's efforts. They support our programs, and they serve those that need it.
In fact, Pope Francis will visit the Catholic Charities of Washington when he's here. Remind us of the Walk with Francis pledge. I love that.
Yes, we would love for everyone to get involved with this. It's open to everyone. You can go to our website, walkwithfrancis.org, sign up, take the pledge, and it's our gift to the Holy Father. We want him to be able to see 100,000 people working to make their community better.
How's the pledge drive going so far?
It's off and running. We're excited. There's 44 organizations that are signed up for it. We've got about 1,400 people that have submitted pledges, and obviously that number is growing, and we're hoping to get it out there even more. I have to ask, have you taken the pledge?
Not yet, but you just hooked me in. I've got to do it now. Julie Bodner with Catholic Charities here in D.C. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, after more than 16 years, America's foremost satirical comedian says goodbye to The Daily Show.
Hey, guess what? I got big news. This is it. This is the final episode.
Jon Stewart's farewell last night featured surprises and cameos from longtime correspondents. The new host of CBS Late Show, Stephen Colbert, was among them. Several politicians got into the act also, including Hillary Clinton and John McCain. The show continues next month with Trevor Noah replacing Stewart, who's decided it is time to move on. So Colbert already has a superstar lined up for his first guest on The Late Show. He announces on Twitter that actor George Clooney will be his first ever guest September 8th. The former host of Comedy Central's Colbert Report succeeds David Letterman as The Late Show host. Hungry goats, that's right, goats, graze at Washington's Congressional Cemetery. This is part of an environmentally friendly experiment. For the second year now, the goats arrive from an area farm to graze for 2 weeks in the wooded areas of this historic cemetery. Cemetery President Paul Williams says it's a useful and cost-effective way to clear the grounds.
Goats are really an environmentally friendly way to clear invasive species that you need removed. It doesn't require the use of harsh chemicals, as we're right on the Anacostia River. And the goat's digestive system takes care of the seeds for us as well.
Mary Bowen, who owns these goats, says this environmental approach is a growing trend in the U.S. and abroad, and those goats clearly having a good time and doing some good work. Until Monday, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Tonight we leave you revisiting today's papal audience with about 1,500 members of the worldwide Eucharistic Youth Movement. Good night, have a wonderful weekend, God bless you.